After going through the melee DPS yesterday, today is the time for the ranged DPS meta tier list for the War Within. Much like we did for the melee DPS, we started looking at the results from the real in-game performance of the specs, but these performances at this point are almost a month old, so we moved on looking at how they were performing in simulations. But then again, these simulations are purely for single target. So we had to start moving and go through the performance they had in Mythic Plus, in-game live results in the beta to try to see how each of the specs is performing. And then, much like we did for the melee DPS, you also have to consider whether or not they will have an easier or a harder time in the first season of the War Within based on the possible competition in its own class. A certain spec might be less likely to be meta because there is a super powerful, healer in their class, or perhaps a very powerful tank in their class, so it might be less likely to see them become very popular, which might be the same for some of these ranged DPS specs. So let's start with the Beast Mastery Hunter, which goes to rest itself in the C tier at the moment. Now, Beast Mastery Hunter went through a few changes in its talents and in its power of the hero talents as well. In particular, Dark Ranger, recently giga-buffed in Black Arrow, making the hero talent now valuable to use. The divide around Beast Mastery Hunter is that now they have some decent single target, especially as Dark Ranger, while in Mythic Plus, and that's a positive, we have counted this as a positive even for the melee DPS, being able to vary between hero talents, right? Being able to change your builds and your hero talents depending on the situation. Beast Mastery can do that at the moment in Mythic Plus in AoE, go between Black Arrow and Dark Ranger or Pack Leader. The problem is that right now their AoE and their Mythic Plus performance is not very good. They do have an actually decent single target, especially as Dark Ranger, so in the raid they will have more power at the moment compared to Mythic Plus, but at the moment their performance, especially in Mythic Plus, is what is holding them down. In the raid they might even be here, possibly even halfway through kind of here when it comes to pure single target damage, but overall it's not looking too good. Especially also what we mentioned yesterday for the melee, Survival is also currently doing quite well in terms of AoE damage, Mythic Plus damage compared to Beast Mastery, so that also further puts Beast Mastery down the list of priority for range DPS. A fate that is practically just shared with its class resident Marksmanship Hunter. Marksmanship doesn't have nearly the same luxury as a BM of being able to choose in Mythic Plus for their hero talents, because Sentinel is the de facto strongest when it comes to AoE. We have seen this for Survival, and it's the same for Marksmanship, where Sentinel, between Sentinel, Lunar Storm, and Symphonic Arsenal, is doing like 25% of your damage in AoE, so you don't really have a choice to play Dark Ranger. In Mythic Plus, you do have this option in single target though, where Dark Ranger becomes more valuable also for Marksmanship, not just for BM. The main issue for Marksmanship is that they might have a similar single target damage if spec'd for it, but Marksmanship is one of those specs that loses a lot when they have to choose between AoE or single target. Having to go down this entire line for your kill shot synergy, and even down this line, and missing out practically on many of the more powerful AoE talents, significantly cuts their Mythic Plus damage. So if they have to go down these talents for AoE damage, they lose a lot more single target when they go in Mythic Plus, which is what ultimately ends up putting them next to BM in a pretty disappointing position. Talking about disappointing, we're not going to spend too much to discuss this. This is obvious. This was going to happen. We even had to struggle finding even any logs of Devastation Evokers in Mythic Plus in the beta because, well, everyone is playing Augmentation. We don't even need to go to find specific logs for Augmentation. I can just go to another log of a different spec, get rid of the spec, and there you go. You will find your Augmentation Evoker, because that's how played they are right now in the beta. And that's ultimately why Devastation ends up far lower down. Last time we looked at Devastation, they were doing pretty good single target. They haven't really been nerfed since then, since the 25th of July. Right now they don't have working APLs for their sims, so even if we were positively to expect them to do good single target damage, especially for the raid, there is still this problem. There's still this augmentation evoker problem, which sucks out a lot of the hope of possibly seeing devastation being relevant, especially in Mythic Plus. Maybe you might squeeze maybe one of them in the raid, but even now it seems unlikely, and this is kind of the unfortunate state right now that devastation is ever since augmentation has been introduced in Dragonflight. Now on to the more roller coaster of the classes, which is Mage. Definitely by far the most changed up and down of the classes, from their own talents to their hero talents, starting with Fire. Fire right now is in a weird position, because Sun Fury has been changed multiple times. When the beta began, the best spec was Fire Mage, playing Sun Fury, and then it was mega nerfed over time. So mages started trying to go Frostfire. Blizzard reworked everything around the right side of the talent tree that synergizes around Lit Fuse and Living Bomb damage, because Frostfire works practically around this talent right here, especially in Mythic Plus, to let you fire off even more Living Bombs for AoE damage. But then this was nerfed. Living Bomb itself was nerfed by a lot in all of these talents. The result is that Fire was kind of screwed, whether or not they were playing around with Frostfire or if they were playing around with Sun Fury. Right now their damage is just undertuned. There isn't really much to say. It is the least bad of the specs we will put here, because all it needs is one of the 50 different balance tunings Blizzard gave Mage in the past month to make it go here. At the moment, especially in Mythic Plus, for example, when it comes to Frostfire, all it needs really for Mythic Plus is to have this side of the talent tree to be buffed to almost what it was again, to give value again to Lit Fuse and to Living Bomb, to make them very good in Mythic Plus and in AoE. Same goes for the tuning when it comes to single target. While Frostfire can have better value in AoE if they make this side of the talent work again, when it comes to single target, Sun Fury can also be very good, because they have more burst, because they focus more around combustion, since the whole thing about your Phoenix spawns when you are in combustion, and then it can buff your combustion right after to give you hyperthermia. After the mega buffs given to Unleashed Inferno, now it's an actual choice, a valuable choice that lets you get free of Sun King's Blessing's prison. Now you just massively empower your combustion window. So with some slightly better tuning, they could also become a very good raid spec when it comes to burst, when it comes to priority single target damage as well. But not right now. Right now their tuning is just bad. So that's where they end up in. Who isn't right now though in a bad spot are both Frost and Arcane Mage. Now, yes, Arcane should kind of be here based on their current performance of their sims, especially of the newly buffed, again, Sun Fury for Arcane, but, you know, being realistic, it will be toned down slightly. It won't be nearly as powerful. It is a funny, bizarro world. Back until just a few weeks ago, it was Arcane that was going for Spellslinger, not Frost Mage. You know, this was your Arcane Mage playing with Spellslinger between Splinter Storm and the Arcane Splinters. You were well above 20% of your damage with a single hero talent, and, you know, Arcane was enjoying being the best spec. But this was, you know, this was a while ago. This was before Spellslinger got nerfed multiple times. It was nerfed multiple times to the point where now Arcane Mages are going Sun Fury instead. Now, the result doesn't change. The result is that it is still one of the best DPS specs in Mythic Plus in this case. So of course, being Blizzard's favorite child, what happens when one of your hero talents get nerfed isn't that you fall into, you know, into irrelevancy, but is that you just get a new hero talent that gets even stronger. And that is the same case for Frost. Frost was kind of in limbo, trying to play with Frostfire, not really having nearly the same success as Fire, especially because this one benefits Fire way more, since they have an entire side of the tree around the value of Living Bomb, but Frost and having Ice Nova being cast, Frost doesn't have nearly the same amount of talents that can actually benefit from Ice Nova, right? In fact, actually nothing. as opposed to the Living Bomb of Fire. So now after the Frost Spell Slinger has been buffed multiple times, now that is what Frost Mages are going for. Despite the attention being taken away by the OP-ness of the Sims, of the Sun Fury Arcane, Spell Slinger for Frost is doing very well. It is still amongst the higher results right now, and in Mythic Plus they are also doing very well, similar to Arcane Mage, so that is where they end up for right now. And also one of the reasons, the second reason why Fire Mage would be so low, because when you also have two other mage specs doing this well, the value of your spec goes even lower down. That is the natural result at the moment of the very finicky balancing of mage. We mentioned with just a single set of balance tuning, you know, some 10% damage increased, Fire Mage could start going up by quite a bit. But for now, this is the situation when it comes to mages. Talking about things being able to change quite a bit very quickly, you have Elemental Shaman. So, Elemental Shaman, we might not have the updated APL for their single target sims. The last time we looked at them, they were doing amongst the best in single target results, but this was changed. This was with Farseer Elemental, which has been nerfed, and since then we haven't gotten any new updates. What we did get, though, still are their results in Mythic Plus, where Elemental Shaman is doing very well in terms of damage. And this isn't even with the nerfed part of Elemental, because this is with Tempest, this is with Stormbringer, and Stormbringer has been buffed. Yes, you did get nerfs, like 15% nerf to Earthquake, for example, to your whole spec, not just something limited to your hero talents. But Stormbringer itself, especially Tempest for Elemental, has been buffed significantly. And now in AoE they are doing very well. Their profile as well, when playing in Mythic Plus with their talents, is still also quite strong in single target. Not nearly as strong as the Lava Burst spam type of build that you would go for if you were Farseer, and playing around as well Ice Fury for more single target damage. But it's not nearly at, you know, Marksmanship Hunter levels of having to lose single target to go for AoE talents. You know, if you were to go, for example, in this key with the Elemental spec as AoE and go for a single target boss, Elemental is still doing quite well in single target as well. And then you have the extra, you know, the extra benefits of being able to play Elemental after the rework of Shaman, which is the extra tankiness given to you by your hero talents with a new button you can press to save yourself. Plus you also have the raid buff now as an Elemental Shaman that you can bring to a raid or to Mythic Plus. So overall, at the moment, even with a slight question mark to the power of their single target, with the nerfed Farseer, they are still looking very, very good. Which was also one of the reasons why we mentioned Enhancement Shaman being a bit lower down compared to their actual performance, because of the power at the moment of Elemental. Now, who is not going to be put down because of the power of other specs in their class, but simply because they don't have power right now, is Balance. Now, we mentioned it's quite easy for Fire Mage to get buffed by 5 or 10% and become actually quite good, either in AoE or in single target. Not nearly as much the case for Balance. So Balance before, last time we looked at, wasn't even doing well. It was doing quite poorly. And then in 3 weeks since, almost a month since, they haven't even improved that much. Even in the Sims, while slightly outdated, they are still doing very poorly. And even in Mythic Plus, even in live results in Mythic Plus, Balance is just not doing that well. They have also been for a while now practically stuck playing Eluna's Chosen and not really interact a lot with Keeper of the Grove. Same issues we have complained about when talking about Druids multiple times. They haven't really gotten any changes to their general talent tree, which is quite poor in the pathing you can go for as a Druid, no matter the spec. The spec talent tree is still quite bad. Your options, your different talents you can pick for example, we mentioned Marksmanship or even Elemental, being able to change quite a few talents to do more single target or more AoE focus damage. Doesn't even have those options. We're talking about some specific couple of talents to use in AoE, for example, but that's about it. Most of the other talents are quite strict in what you can go for. And right now, a lot of it comes down to tuning, which is poor for Balanced Druid. On to then Warlocks, which are likely the second most changed class in here after Mage. Let's start with the better of the three, the one that after all of this switcheroo back and forth between who was the strongest one of the three, at the moment the one that's winning out is Affliction. What is Affliction winning out on? Well, first of all, for practically a month and a half of the beta, they were just using Hellcaller as a hero talent. They had no options to play Soul Harvester because, well, it was bugged and it wasn't really doing anything in terms of damage. Then it has been fixed and buffed multiple times to the point where now Soul Harvester is actually a pretty decent option for Affliction. When it comes to straight up single target damage at the moment, Soul Harvester is getting above Hellcaller, while Hellcaller with its Wither damage is still the default choice in Mythic Plus. And this hasn't changed in a while. You know, this was early July and Affliction Warlocks were still playing with Hellcaller and with Wither damage. The main change that happened in a bit over a month was Blizzard giving more damage to Malefic Rapture and taking it away from Wither. So now the only thing that changed is that over a month later, you still play with this, but now Malefic Rapture does more damage than your Wither, or at least matching damage. But the rest of your flow as an Affliction Warlock is still remaining quite the same. You line up your 1 minute cooldowns, your Soul Rot, you pool your soul shards, you pool your free cast of Malefic Rapture, you go for Soul Rot every minute together with Malevolence, and you have these cycles of burst damage, which are actually quite good for Mythic Plus, for the rotation of Mythic Plus, because it happens every minute, which is quite a good timing for Mythic Plus, you know, big packs being pulled. You know, you set up your dots, you set up your CDs, and then you spam some Malefic Raptures. That's good damage. And then once you have your cooldowns back, you go and do it again. And then you go on and you do it again. It's a pretty good profile when it comes to AoE damage in Mythic Plus right now for Affliction Warlock. Now, the other specs have been here at some point in time during the beta, both demo and destruction. However, their current state is not nearly as good. For starters, unlike Affliction, Demonology doesn't really do nearly as well with Soul Harvester. It has not found the same success it has for Affliction. They are much more being stuck around Diabolist as a hero talent, which used to be super powerful, and then it was nerfed a couple of weeks ago. So now Demo is still playing with Diabolist, but just not nearly as powerful as before. Even though their single target is quite similar to Affliction, not their AoE, not their consistent AoE damage and these 1 minute burst windows that Affliction can have. Demo is not quite up to par with Affliction at the moment. Who has, however, gotten their dreams shattered even more is definitely Destruction. Because just up until a couple of weeks ago, things were going great for Destruction. You know, you had tons of logs of everyone going in, Mythic Plus playing as Destruction, having fun, getting almost 2 million DPS in a plus 14, because Diabolist had just been buffed, and you had your Diabolist talents, your Diabolist abilities doing almost 40% of your damage. However, since then, this has been significantly nerfed, so Destruction had to go back playing what they were playing before in Mythic Plus, which is Hellcaller. That is not nearly as powerful as the Diabolist version of Destruction was. So they're now back to being quite disappointing. They're also at the moment simming the least in single target when it comes to the Warlock specs. So between the single target not being great right now, plus the AoE being worse than both of the other Warlock specs, it is not looking too good at all for Destruction at the moment. The last of the list is Shadow Priest. Now, Shadow Priest was somewhat comfortably hanging around this area, more or less, for a while. And then a series of changes happened, and now Shadow Priest is here. What happened is that after the 17th nerf that came the way of Void Weaver and the 10th buff that came the way of Archon, together with a series of buffs given to Shadow Priest, in particular the buffs given to Surge of Insanity, going all the way down to only being a 1.5 second channel and significantly increasing its damage. The extra buff given to Archon, in particular empowers Surges, which further buffs this insanity damage has moved many/most of the Shadow Priests to go over to Archon. Even in Mythic Plus, Archon is now the way to go. You don't really care about the extra damage you get to do with Halo, is more about the empowered damage you get to do with your insanity casts as a Shadow Priest, and the fact of having a few other QOLs, like the fact that, for example, now you can stack up 4 of these Surge of Insanity charges instead of only 2, and they last for longer, so you can now do some sort of pseudo pooling of these charges for big bursts inside your cooldowns. That is something you can do now even better as Archon because of the big buff you get while playing Archon. This has given an edge now to Shadow Priest for both single target, but in particular for AoE. In Mythic Plus, as we looked at a few days ago, they were one of the more broad Mythic Plus specs, together with Arcane and with Augmentation Evoker. While their single target damage might not be excellent, to be fair, neither are some of these specs like Affliction or like Frost. So they still have a lot of their power in their current version when it comes to Mythic Plus and AoE damage. Another benefit, another very good benefit for Shadow, something we have touched on that can happen for Devastation or for Fire or even for the Hunter specs, is that they don't have at the moment much of any competition, because right now both Discipline and Holy are not doing too well. So you might not be nearly as afraid of losing a spot because your group already has a super powerful Discipline Priest that is very meta. Right now, this is not really looking like to be a thing in the first season of The War Within. So you are even at the moment more safe as a Shadow Priest. So with this last spec pointed out, we are now done going through the range DPS as well. So now we have the melee DPS on one side and the range DPS on the other. Of course, they might be in different tiers. Maybe the A tier of a melee DPS will go down into the B tier of a range DPS because of how more popular or better the range DPS are at the moment. If we were to fuse them in one, it would probably look like this at the end of going through the DPS specs as a whole after today. So with this recap done through for the range DPS as well, it is now time to leave each other on this Sunday, I believe. So with this out of the way, thanks of course as usual guys for having watched the video, as well as for having supported completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, well, it's time to go out, and also quite quickly, because it looks like it could be raining from any time. And of course, as soon as I step out, it definitely will.